What if I told you that the difference between someone who pays their taxes honestly and someone who evades them isn't just about money or morality, but about deep psychological wiring that exists in all of us? Today we're diving into the hidden psychology behind tax evasion, and trust me, what you discover might completely change how you view your own relationship with taxes. Picture this. Two people receive identical tax bills. One pays without hesitation, while the other immediately starts scheming ways to avoid it. What's happening in their minds that creates such different responses? The answer lies in psychological principles that have been shaping human behavior for thousands of years, long before tax systems even existed. Let's start with something called psychological reactance. This is your brain's automatic rebellion against being told what to do. When governments impose taxes, they're essentially commanding you to give up your hard-earned money. For some people, this triggers an almost primal urge to resist. It's the same mechanism that makes teenagers rebel against curfews or makes you want to speed up when you see a speed limit sign. Your brain interprets taxes as a threat to your autonomy, and tax evasion becomes an act of psychological freedom. But here's where it gets really interesting. The decision to evade taxes isn't just about rebellion. It's also about something psychologists call moral disengagement. This is your mind's ability to convince itself that normally unacceptable behavior is actually justified. Tax evaders don't typically see themselves as criminals. Instead, they create elaborate mental justifications. They tell themselves the government wastes money anyway, or that everyone else is doing it, or that they deserve to keep what they earned. These aren't just excuses they tell others. They genuinely believe these rationalizations at a psychological level. There's also a fascinating phenomenon called the identifiable victim effect that plays into tax psychology. When you donate to charity and see a specific child your money helps, you feel good about giving. But taxes? That money disappears into a vast government machine. You can't see exactly where your dollars go or who they help. This psychological distance makes it much easier to justify keeping that money instead. Your brain struggles to connect your tax payment with actual human benefit, so the moral weight of evasion feels lighter. Now let's talk about something that might surprise you: the fairness perception paradox. Research shows that people's willingness to pay taxes is heavily influenced by whether they believe the system is fair. But here's the twist: fairness isn't objective. Two people can look at the exact same tax system and have completely opposite reactions. Someone who sees wealthy individuals paying higher rates might think that's perfectly fair. Another person might view those same progressive rates as punishment for success. These competing fairness frameworks create vastly different psychological environments for tax compliance. The social proof principle also plays a massive role. Humans are wired to look around and see what others are doing, then adjust their behavior accordingly. If you believe most people in your community are honest taxpayers, you're more likely to be honest too. But if you think tax evasion is widespread, suddenly it starts feeling normal, even expected. This creates dangerous tipping points where communities can shift toward widespread evasion simply because the perception of others' behavior changes. There's another psychological factor that's particularly relevant in our digital age: the tangibility bias. Cash transactions feel more real to your brain than digital ones. When governments move toward cashless systems and digital payments, they're not just increasing convenience, they're actually making it harder for people to psychologically engage in tax evasion because digital transactions leave clearer trails and feel more official to our minds. Risk perception adds another layer of complexity. Some people are naturally risk-averse while others are risk-seekers. But tax evasion risk isn't just about getting caught. It's about social risk, reputation risk, and psychological risk. The fear of being seen as dishonest can be more powerful than the fear of penalties for some people. For others, the thrill of outsmarting the system becomes part of the appeal. Let's explore something called temporal discounting. This is your brain's tendency to value immediate rewards more than future consequences. Tax evasion offers immediate gratification. You keep more money right now. The potential consequences, like audits or penalties, feel distant and abstract. This psychological quirk makes tax evasion particularly tempting for people who struggle with long-term thinking. The authority relationship also matters enormously. Some people have deep-seated trust in government institutions and view tax compliance as civic duty. Others have fundamental distrust of authority and see tax evasion as justified resistance. These attitudes often form early in life and are incredibly difficult to change. They're not really about taxes at all, but about how someone's psyche relates to power structures in general. Here's something fascinating about cognitive dissonance in tax behavior. When people start evading taxes, they experience psychological discomfort because their actions conflict with their self-image as honest citizens. To resolve this discomfort, they don't usually change their behavior. Instead, they change their beliefs about taxes, government, and morality. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where initial evasion leads to increasingly elaborate justifications and potentially more evasion. Social identity theory reveals another crucial element. People don't just pay or evade taxes as individuals, they do it as members of groups. Small business owners might view aggressive tax strategies as smart business sense. Employees receiving regular paychecks might see tax evasion as fundamentally dishonest. Your professional and social identities shape your psychological relationship with tax obligations in profound ways. The complexity of modern tax systems also creates psychological barriers to compliance. When people don't understand the rules, they experience learned helplessness. If the system feels impossibly complex, some people give up trying to comply correctly and either overpay out of fear or underpay out of frustration. This complexity doesn't just create practical problems, it creates psychological ones that can push people toward evasion. Mental accounting is another powerful psychological force. People create separate mental buckets for different types of money. Tax refunds often feel like windfalls to be spent freely, even though they're just return of overpaid taxes. Similarly, money that feels like it should have been yours anyway is easier to justify keeping through evasion than money that clearly belongs to someone else. The spotlight effect also influences tax behavior. This is your tendency to overestimate how much others notice your actions. Some people avoid tax evasion because they imagine everyone will know, while others engage in it because they assume their small-scale evasion is invisible. Both groups are usually wrong about how much attention their tax behavior actually receives. Understanding these psychological patterns doesn't excuse tax evasion, but it does help explain why purely rational approaches to tax policy often fail. Humans aren't rational calculators weighing costs and benefits. We're complex psychological beings influenced by identity, emotion, social context, and deep-seated cognitive biases. This knowledge can actually make you a better taxpayer by helping you recognize your own psychological vulnerabilities. When you feel that surge of resentment at tax time, you can recognize it as psychological reactance rather than genuine moral insight. When you start justifying aggressive deductions, you can catch your moral disengagement in action. The most successful tax systems understand human psychology rather than fighting against it. They make compliance feel fair, socially expected, and personally meaningful. They minimize complexity and maximize the connection between payments and visible benefits. What's your biggest psychological challenge when it comes to taxes? Have you noticed any of these patterns in your own thinking? Understanding the hidden psychology behind tax evasion isn't just academic curiosity. It's practical wisdom that can help you navigate your own financial decisions with greater self-awareness and ultimately make choices that align with both your values and your long-term interests.